Why Procedamus? I remember the day after my ordination, the morning of my first Mass, vesting in the sacristy, putting on the amice, putting on the alb, the cincture, the maniple, the stole, the vestments. I remember the 10 years that I had been preparing for this moment. Aside from the emotions and the nerves, I was aware of what offering the holy sacrifice of the Mass means for myself and for all the faithful. But additionally, given the context of the current persecution of the traditional Catholic faith in the world and in the church. I grabbed my chalice, I grabbed my beretta, looked at the crucifix, bowed, and said, Procedamus in pacem, to which the altar servers replied, In nomine Christi, Amen. I put on my beretta, and we processed out to the altar to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass of the ages. Ascending the steps of the altar, I felt only gratitude to our Lord for having allowed me to be an instrument in preserving that which is true, good, and beautiful for future generations, for the ages to come. As long as I'm physically able, this Mass will continue to be offered. This spirit of determination, this spirit of perseverance, is that to which I would love to invite all of you to share. The first annual Procedamus Gala is organized to support the mission of the Oblates of St. Augustine and the Old Roman Catholic See of Caer-Glow to preserve the traditional Latin Mass and the traditional Catholic faith for future generations. Procedamus. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Restless Heart Media. We have a completely and totally random show for you tonight. Father Stephen Lafort joins us from the East Coast of Florida, where he's working at a parish, traditional Latin Mass parish. And then we have His Excellency Bishop Meikle here tonight with us as well. Father Lafort flew in this morning, and the three of us went out to breakfast. And of course, we're talking shop, right? Talking what same thing that traditional Latin Mass priests talk about all the time, the crisis in the church, how to solve it, what we're doing about it. And we were talking about certain things, and we were just like, hey, why don't we just talk about these things out loud, live? Why not? One of the things that is kind of characteristic of us is that we tell you exactly what we talk about in our rectory. Like there's no duplicity. There's no, we have to say something quietly, hush, hush, and then we go out and try to please the crowd, so to speak. What we think about the crisis, what we think about the hierarchy is all crystal clear. And that's what we're here to do for you guys tonight. Father Lafort, Your Excellency, thanks for being on Restless Heart Media.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Very glad to be here.
All right, so maybe some of the things that we were talking about this morning at breakfast, it was pretty interesting stuff. So I don't know exactly where we want to start, what you guys are feeling about starting. Father Lafort, any ideas?
Well, I've been living under a rock in the traditional world for the last 5 years, and I've been able to make a lot of good friends of clergy, bishops, good priests, living a very humble life, a silent life. And I think there's a lot of unknown that a lot of traditional clergy have to go through on a daily basis, contrary to those that work in the system of the Novus Ordo. And number one is we have to give up our salaries. We give up our health insurance, car insurance, all of the 3 hots in the cot that the Novus Ordo provides, the central bank of the diocese provides. And so we as clergy, bishops and priests alike, we're charged with an office to teach, to govern, and to sanctify. And when it comes to teaching, governing, and sanctifying, we can't compromise the gospel. We can't compromise the sacraments and the truth. And with that, there's a lot of challenges as traditional clergy we have to face. The first of which is we have to be provided for by church law, by the faithful. And the church has always, in America especially, struggled with what's called Americanism, in that lay people own church properties versus the clergy owning the church properties. And if a laity doesn't like a priest, they can actually get rid of them. And this is an age-old problem. This is not specific to any particular priest or community. We're not trying to single anybody out, but this is a topic that does need to be discussed. It's one of the reasons I'm now in Florida and not in Louisiana, because I wanted to go to a place where there was stability, where the clergy, where an organization existed of bishops and clergy existing, where they own their own church property, because that offers stability to the priest. So I know that that's one topic we did talk about that's very important.
Yeah, it is interesting, Father, you say that, because we're on uncharted ground, and of course we'll have a mixed audience here, and some of these issues maybe, well, to the regular viewers, they know what's going on, but to people that are just maybe tuning in from more the synodal church, for example, they don't understand. Well, there's the opposite problem in a sense there, where you have church properties being liquidated to pay for legal fees, and generations of somebody's family could have donated to a church, and their priest did nothing wrong, their community did nothing wrong, but somehow they lose their church to pay for somebody else's mistake. So the whole issue, church property has been an issue since the book of Acts. So it is kind of interesting, but I think you have a good point there, that there has to be some ecclesiastical authority that manages at least the chapels and the priest residences, because if not, you end up with he who pays the piper calls the tune. And although the traditional movement has been, is very grateful to some well-heeled benefactors, they have to have a concept that they give their gift to God, and then we're the stewards. And if we fail to use that properly, we have to account to God for it. The problem is that if you have a Baptist ecclesiology but a Catholic theology, your ministry is impeded. So if a board of trustees that have disproportionate wealth, right? We're not talking about everybody contributed about the equal amount, but every once in a while you come across some of these independent chapels with a huge benefactor with an outsized influence. And I even had a large benefactor once. And I mean, we're not in that case that you were mentioning, because we don't have a mortgage. We own all our buildings. But I had it happen. I lost 30% of a parish revenue over a well-heeled benefactor that didn't like St. Alphonsus, apparently. So they emailed me and they tried to editorialize the sermon. And I said, well, I'm sorry. That's, this is the teaching of the church. St. Alphonsus is the doctor of the church. If you have an issue with it, pray and take it to him. But that they pulled their benefaction over St. Alphonsus. So, and this is someone that'll go to a traditional mass, but apparently, they like the mass, but maybe not the faith behind it, which maybe we can address a little later. I don't know if Father Martin's, he's had some experiences as well.
Yeah, for sure. One of the issues, I mean, you begin with people's goodwill, right? They have, maybe they're willing to sell their house or do something to give a priest a place to live, and make a little room in a shed, in a garage, for a chapel. All is great there. But then, of course, a priest doesn't just want to say priest for one family. No priest wants to belong to just one family. No one wants to be owned, a family's employee. Priests, we have hearts for the apostolate. We have, especially if you're a very rare traditional Latin Mass priest, like you want to welcome as many people as possible. And so we want the chapel to be, of course, open, in a sense, open to the public. We want to let other people know about it, let other families who want the true faith to come and to receive the sacraments and to be fed. But the problem is, whenever the host family, so to speak, doesn't like someone coming to the chapel, you get a question of who's actually in authority here. Is it the priest? Is it the benefactor? Right. And so this is kind of one of the reasons why, I jokingly say, but it's kind of unfortunately it's true. And this is one of the unspoken issues that we have is, I like to jokingly say that in the traditional Latin Mass movement, we actually do have female bishops. We just call them benefactors, in the sense that they're kind of, if they decide they don't like somebody else's wife, the wives go head to head and the whole chapel blows up. The priest can try to get in there and tell and to be the ultimate authority. But if the lay people don't accept the authority, or the benefactors say, no, we're the authority, not the priest, all the money that people could have possibly donated to that priest for the chapel and all that kind of stuff, now it's kind of all lost and, in a sense, left with that family. So, yeah.
That's the danger of lay people owning the church property. And whenever the clergy are involved, they can actually be dad in the situation and call the final shots. But if you put a disorder to that authority, where the clergy is no longer the head, but actually the laity, then all of a sudden that authority structure is messed up to where the devil can creep in and cause division. And that's what the heresy of Americanism was all about. It was condemned by Pope Leo XIII, I believe. And that was one of the major problems. I know in Louisiana, in the new Archdiocese of New Orleans, it was a problem who owned St. Louis, the board of directors or the bishop. And could the bishop appoint his own priest there, or did the lay people want their own priest who happened to be a heretic? And but he gave good sermons. And so a bishop can actually discipline his priest better if he's in charge of the building than if the lay people are. The shepherd needs to be in charge. There's a proper head to everything.
And we're not saying too that lay people don't have a role in the temporal goods of the church. They do. Like boards of trustees and different organizations are going to have different ways of making sure that the the common pot is being used properly. Unfortunately, the clergy attract the best and worst of humanity too, right? So I mean, we've had cases historically there where I this is so crazy you can't make it up. I went to a seminary that there was a bit of a scandal in the diocese, and it wasn't the seminary I went to was not the seminary I was studying. It was not in the same diocese as the diocese I was studying for. But the diocese that owned the seminary had a bit of a scandal, and but it was one of the popular priests, and he embezzled something like $250,000 or something like that. And he took it to the casino, and he was going to make all this money for the church, and of course it ended badly. And and no exaggeration, they ended up making the field education director. So I used to say, well, what's he going to run? Big O Practicum or Audit 101? Like, it was kind of funny, but it's funny and sad. But why I tell the story is it underlines that, yes, there should be checks and balances to make sure, we're not talking about that people shouldn't be accountable. But, if lay people have an issue with the clergy, there's a chain of command. They go to their bishop, right? And that is how it's supposed to be. Now, in some cases, you've got priests that are just sort of without any kind of bishop. And that's not what the early church did. That's not the Catholic way. And so you end up with no accountability. And so it can work on abuse can happen on either side. And I think both of you have had some insight and experience into that.
I think a good litmus test, this was actually asked to me yesterday. It was brought to my attention by a good friend of mine at the parish down in South Florida. But if he gave the question, if you were given $10 million today, what would you do with it? And his own answer was this. Now, this guy is 26 years old. He works. He's a very holy blue collar guy. He actually just came into the church this past year and got married in the church. Thanks be to God. And he said that, well, the first thing I would do is I would buy a used 2015 Honda Pilot. That was the car I had in high school. And then I'd get out of debt, and then I would help as many people as I could with that $10 million. And I thought that's real wealth. Real wealth is how many people are you able to help with your wealth? And that's the idea for myself. I know so many priests in tradition, because we don't have a lot of land or properties or assets or even lay faithful to support us. There's a lot of priests out there that are struggling, very holy priests. They spend all their time praying, offering Holy Mass, praying the Rosary, praying their breviary. They oftentimes give good spiritual direction to different people. We also, we hear each other's confessions, yet we're living in debt. We're living in poverty. And I think lay people don't realize whenever we support and big financial ways, especially lay people that actually do the job of teaching, governing, and sanctifying that they're not ordained to do. And they get large levels of donations, and there's a lot of clergy. Hold on a second. Hold on. Sorry about that.
Now, my ringtone's church bells, Father, so
Right. So, well, this is from my computer hooked up to my phone.
Oh, I'm just teasing you anyway.
So I don't deal with that particular ringtone too often. But, I'm not talking in specifics. I'm not talking about specific people. I'm talking about in general that there's so many clergy that I know firsthand, so many bishops that we live paycheck to paycheck. And we're very grateful for everything that the faithful has provided. I know that whenever I came here, I was very much amazed by the hospitality of both of you to take me in, and how generous you were to we have our needs met. That's all every clergy wants, is to have their needs met and to not worry about debt, so that they can actually do the work that needs to be done. And so anyway, that's another aspect of this, that there's a lot of what's our focus on, how can we do the most good helping the church. There's a lot of clergy that don't get a lot of airtime because they do a lot of silent work, but I tell people, I had to choose. When I was back in Louisiana, I had to make a choice between a wealthy benefactor and supporting a traditional bishop that I knew. And they said, oh, we don't like that traditional bishop, so you can't support him and be in communion with him. And I told that benefactor, I said, well, you can't give me absolution from my sins. He can. It's very simple. For me, it was a spiritual reality that was more important. The priesthood it needs to be supported, and so that we can have the Eucharist, we can have the sacraments, and we shouldn't take that for granted.
Well, Father, just a couple of days ago, and this happens several times a year, I get calls from current Novus Ordo or synodal church priests, and they're just sort of kicking the tires, like, what are the options if things get really, really bad and this kind of thing. And I always link it back. It's what God wants you to do. And also, you're bound by your promise of obedience. So until you're asked to do something contra fide, which, we could argue that happens, that the bar can be kind of low depending on the diocese. You have to take that obligation seriously, and that has to be discerned before God. But, I have a case where, the priest and I have had a relationship on the, electronically and on the phone for some time. And he's a well-known figure, but anyway, he's he's about to be laicized, or potentially will be laicized, over basically a high school insult fest with his ordinary. And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's basically what it is. And here's the problem. What do we do with a priest in his, nearing his retirement? If he gets cut off, he's going to lose everything. He's going to get kicked out of his residence. He's going to get impoverished. And all he wants to do is be Catholic, like his grandmother's been Catholic. But if you speak up, it's almost like that in the movies. The mob has this omerta. You speak against, and that's one of the things that Father Martin led with. We are the same right here online. Those of you who know us in person, we're the same people. We are not the one advantage. There's pluses and minuses to every life situation. But one of the advantages we have is we can speak plainly with you. No one's going to cancel us for being plain with you. And I look at this priest, and I hope, I'd like to be able to one day match benefactors who do want to help the church to sort of adopt some of these retiring priests that are being hurt. And because we have the potential with, if we could renovate some stuff, we have the potential of, housing some of these retired priests and some of these younger priests who are just getting railroaded out because they want to say the old mass and they want to have the old faith. So, but anyway, that's down the road. Part of the reason for the Procedamus Gala, which Father Martin had as sort of his intro, spiel there, is to make the connections necessary. So we build a network of faithful that can help decide as a group, okay, what, who should we be helping here? What's the mission? And the mission, I think, should be evangelization to the old faith, zeal for souls, and the restoration of Christendom. So also has a social order component. But anyway, sorry, way off the topic of what Father LaForce talking about. I'm just saying there's another side. Like, he found a place with us, and we found a community that welcomed him. But by the same token, we were able to help him. There's piles of people that are in the synodal church that want to come to tradition, and they would stay if they were just left alone. Father Martin got kicked out because he prayed a Latin breviary in the privacy of his own room, like silly stuff.
If I did other things in my bedroom, I probably would have been allowed to stay, but no.
Yeah,
I prayed in Latin.
And he was even willing to meet them halfway, do the English, and me too. I mean, I used to accommodate the synodal stuff a lot more. And then I just saw the fruit of it. And it was like, I realized you can't compromise the faith. You can, it was, you try to square the circle as long as you can, because your friends are there and you love your seminary and you love your professors and you don't want to let them down. On the other hand, it's, do we fear God or not? do we believe in this stuff or not? If we believe in it, we can't be complicit with the destruction.
So, Mark, exactly. This is exactly what we're talking about. We just need more TLM churches. Our tradition is the future. And this is kind of what we're saying, is that, I think many times we run into situations to where either we're serving poor. Obviously, we can't charge for what we do, right? We cannot charge for what we do. We have to give it for free. Everything we put out online, of course, there's no paywall to this channel. There's no paywall to our Substack. There's no paywall to our Twitter accounts. All because the things that we're actually giving people is that which is helpful to get to heaven. And how are we gonna say, oh, this stuff, my content is helpful to get to heaven, but you have to pay for it? I mean, come on, no. But at the same time, yeah, we need to live. We can't give more TLM churches if we don't have priests to staff them. We can't have priests to staff them unless their temporal needs are met. And so while there's poor people who can't literally provide, like literally every single dollar that they earn goes to the food in the refrigerator. Maybe they're like, mixing milk with water to give to their kids because to make the milk last the whole week. So we have to consider those people in mind. But also it's like, there are those who are not necessarily giving their 10% because they want to make sure they have their finger or the thumb over the priest a little bit. Don't say anything like, don't preach anything like St. Alphonsus from the pulpit, or these sorts of things. And so that's kind of one of the things that I think is kind of prevalent quietly, but nevertheless still there in some traditional communities, is that the benefactors do actually try to control the priests.
And to think about how much help could we give to other priests in tradition, to Mark's comment, we would have so many more parishes, traditional Latin Mass parishes, and priests had those particular priests from the Novus Ordo doing the indult Mass had a place to go where they could be with church property underneath a bishop, have priest community, and we would have the resource to support them, because there's so many priests who have medical issues, they have financial issues, or they have just practical things. For example, if we were set up in Knoxville or in Charlotte last year, true story, I was underneath a different bishop. I love him dearly, but he only owns his church is his house. Okay, he offers Mass in his house, and very holy and very pious and very supportive, by the way, very tremendously supportive and prayerful holy man. But because there's very little structure of helping other clergy and starting a parish, let's say in Knoxville or Charlotte, I went there last year. They had one family in each area between Knoxville and Charlotte, that in each place, that asked me to discern with them opening up a chapel, and no other families wanted to open up a chapel with them. And a year later, their Latin Masses are being taken away.
Right.
And it was prophetic. But I mean, we all saw it. This is why Father Martin and Bishop Meikle, myself, and many other traditional clergy decided to leave the system, because there was no way to keep the Catholic faith and sacraments alive whenever Rome is trying to kill it. And, trying to make appeasement with Rome just to have the Latin Mass at the forsaking of the Catholic faith, which, Rome, it's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. So if you take the Catholic faith out of it, there's no grace that actually comes from that Mass that is supposed to give us the faith. The bishop that rescued me in tradition, he said the Catholic faith is a fountain of grace. And once you have that fountain of grace of the true faith, it wells up within your soul, and it gives you so much peace and clarity about what to do to discern the will of God, that nothing else really matters. And you're going to start living with integrity as a result. And there's so many priests that want to live with integrity. They want to say what they have to say, but they don't want to be canceled by it. And there's so many priests that if they knew that they were canceled, there was somewhere to catch them, they would go and go to a place that is not going to judge them from their Novus Ordo upbringing, because we all were raised in the Novus Ordo, and to transfer over to tradition, because it's a whole process to be reformed in tradition. It's not easy. The part of the reason I've been under a rock for 5 years after being ordained in tradition was because there was so much to learn. And, if I'm going to speak publicly on these topics, I got to know what I'm talking about. We have an office to teach, to govern, and to sanctify. And so if we don't know what we're teaching, how we're going to know how to govern, and how we're going to know if we're sanctifying properly, because people will be turned off and say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And we're more than just sacramental dispensers. We have the time to dedicate to reading Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and St. Alphonsus Liguori and the other doctors of the church, and do deep dives in Bible studies. By the way, shameless plug for my Bible study on the book of Genesis. and started live streaming on Zoom. So you could put there's a Zoom link in all the descriptions, so you can every Monday at 7 p.m. if you want to listen to it live. But I mean, those are just things. If we had a system, which is what the Sea of Caer-Glow is, that could be supportive enough for more priests, that we can open up more parishes, and Knoxville and Charlotte would have could stick their thumb at the local ordinary who doesn't give two flips about our Lord and the faith and the faith of all the church, the Catholic Church itself, and say we're going to continue being Catholic because we don't need permission to be Catholic.
Exactly. So kind of dovetailing on this issue, I mean, we've talked a little about what clergy expect, and also which groups laity should support in a sense, but more about this, which groups should laity support. There's basically many of the traditionalist groups define themselves in such a way that they're differentiated, not just in just being a separate group from other groups, but rather on some sort of theological basis. There's some sort of there's something in theology to where they disagree with some other group, and a lot of these groups end up fighting over these theological issues. And in fighting over these theological issues, maybe sometimes they feel that they have to punish those that don't subscribe to what they themselves believe. So this kind of has three of our proposed topics all in one. One is the trad civil wars. Two is last rites. Which groups can you trust to be there, and to give you the last rites when you need the sacraments the most? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that?
If I could speak to this about last rites, the highest rule of the church is the salvation of souls. It's the principal rule of the church. So everything for the salvation of souls is permissible. Even a laicized, excommunicated Catholic priest, validly ordained, can give last rites to somebody who's dying, who's a baptized Catholic. And there are some ecclesiastical, traditional groups that will deny last rites to Catholics who are baptized because they're not part of their group. And this happened, I know specifically, I won't say names, but there was a traditional bishop who was a friend of my bishop who was dying, and he lived 30 minutes away from the other nearest bishop. And so my bishop called this particular bishop and said, hey, can you give last rites, or one of your priests give last rites to my friend who's dying? And he said no. And he ignored him. Any other request, he said, for the love of God, please anoint my friend. And they denied him and said, well, we don't know him, we don't trust him. And it's like, are you really going to do this, play this game of salvation on the line and deny last rites to a man who's given his whole life to the traditional Catholic movement? And just because he didn't subscribe to your particular flavor of tradition or particular theology and philosophy, he's outside the church and he's asking for last rites. You're going to deny salvation to this guy? And so fortunately, what happened was my bishop was able to contact another priest 2 hours away and was able to and that priest drove 2 hours to give last rites to that particular traditional bishop, who was able to die in the graces of the church and make a profession of faith and everything else. But the principle is that, what are we even doing this for? Are we doing this for my kingdom or the kingdom? Are we doing this to build an empire or to build the kingdom of heaven on earth? And ultimately, it's always been my policy, and I know it's yours as well, but we do try to never undercut another traditional group. You have the Catholic faith, you have traditional Catholic orders. We're not at opposition with you, we're co-workers with you. And we are so spread thin, it's like a bomb went off. I know Father Anthony Cicada, he said this, that many traditional clergy and laity have their theology based on their geography. Theology is based on geography. So what that means is, when Vatican II that bomb went off, it scattered all the laity and clergy that had Catholic faith to the four winds. And wherever you landed, you just found whoever had some semblance of the Catholic faith left, and you gravitated to those people, and you started trying to make sense of what happened after this bomb of Vatican II went off. And so your worldview is shaped by that local community of the geography of the faithful Catholics around you. That's just natural. Well, when you do that, you start castling in Cincinnati, or castling in New York, or you're castling in Florida, or you're castling in Louisiana, castling in whatever state you're in. I know Idaho. Wow. I mean, that traditional Catholic movement in Idaho is like every flavor of traditional Catholicism you want is in Idaho. And it almost kind of rivals Rome in a sense. But the point is, we have to have a still remain with charity towards one another when it comes to understanding this crisis, without a head to actually guide the ship, which kind of lends itself to the natural conclusion. I mean, when I know Father Dave Nix once said, because I read his material regularly, he said that when male Mustangs don't have an alpha male, they all start biting each other. And I'm tired of getting bit, and I don't want to bite other people. And I just want to help save souls. I want to I want to learn the Catholic faith. I want to teach the Catholic faith. I want to practice the Catholic faith and give Catholic sacraments and help other people get to heaven and help myself get to heaven. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. And when there is a true Catholic Pope in Rome one day to sort it all out, we'll submit to whatever decision he makes. But until then, there's souls at stake. I mean, right now in South Florida, before we get to the next topic, I mean, since I've been there in April, our parish has doubled, and collections have increased, and we've had baptisms and marriages. And I mean, everybody in my parish when I got there was over 50 years old. And now we actually have the other half that grew, the double that other half that came later is all under 30. So, I mean, it's amazing when you walk around South Florida, there's a lot of people not practicing any faith at all, or they're practicing Protestantism or some new age thing. And they see a priest walking around with his cassock and Saturno, and they say, well, who are you? And it gets dialogue going. And then all of a sudden Bible studies are started, and men's groups are forming. And all of a sudden there's a support system of camaraderie that the world has not provided for them in their whole existence of life, outside of like high school, just goofing off, so it's very life-giving for me. Imagine what a priest can do if he's unchained to actually be a Catholic priest. So yeah, that's my riff on that section.
Yeah, and I just echo Father too. I view any Catholic of goodwill who's just trying to restore the church and the world as a friend, even if it's not always reciprocated. And again, our future differences will be sorted out by a Holy Father who wants to restore the old faith. So it's either that or God wraps it up. Like, there's really only two options: either we're going to get a Holy Father that restores the faith, or we're going to get a wrap up. Because the current path, I was some of you follow me on Twitter, and I haven't been on so much the last couple of weeks, but I just click on my feed, and there it was, a Catholic journalist article on Cardinal Ratcliffe hosting the Cardinals. And it's like, you look it up. I'm not even going to tell you what he said, what was Eucharistic, what human copulation practice he said was Eucharistic. And he's on public record with this, and he's considered an example. And then, and this is the problem, some people think it's all about just the TLM. I mean, the TLM is the most important issue, but it's also the faith that goes with it, in the very basics, like chastity, regardless of her state of life, or just the basic Catholic devotionals and the tools we need to live a good life with God's good help. And instead, it's become this thing, what I call McReligion. You walk into a church, there's people that literally will walk in at the gospel, and then you see a lineup of people distributing our Lord as if he's a mere snack. Buddy Christ, buddy Christ, buddy Christ. And the thing is that it's very hard to reconcile that practice, the de jure, the law, and the de facto are so far and wide in Christian practice across community and denomination that that's the real tragedy. The devil's attack of the 21st century or even the last 60 years has been to unmoor us from that. We all end up walking around with our church teaching one thing on paper, and then people living another way. we have to return to the first commandment and to the traditional practices of ancient Christianity, so that we can restore this world. God will help us if we let him. It's like Jonah's knocking at the door in Nineveh, and in Nineveh's case, they welcomed him. But I look at our society, and it's a 50-50 shot. I hope that with some of the successes that we seem to have in our secular order, returning some sanity, no more 42 genders and stuff. Some of the sanity's returning, but if people don't turn back to God, we're going to lose all of it again. So there's a sense for me, and I'm insufficient, or in I have work to do myself, right? Like I'm not I'm a work in progress, but you realize how many Catholics have left for the Orthodox Church since 2013? They went from something like 600,000 to millions now. And if you're baptized West, I want to see people fight for the West. But trad groups often infight, and we don't have shared mission. And there are a few good bishops, actually Father Lafour's former bishop as well, or is currently incarnated one. But, these are men of God who, even if we don't agree on every little detail, we share a common mission to restore, right? So anyway, it's very interesting to see what'll happen with all of this going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
You bring up
as you were saying, Your Excellency, the infighting is so bad. There was there might be a lag in the internet. We're all three of us are using the same internet. I'm sure it's getting tired of us. There was a time where I had a chapel, and I heard about that another traditionalist bishop was in town, and he would like to have used our chapel to have mass for his congregation, there in the same city. So of course, rising tide raises all boats. So I allowed him to use the chapel. He was very cordial to me, let him use my chapel twice. But during that time period, one of my benefactors in the same town invited this bishop over to their house for dinner. And during that time when he was spending time with this family that was my benefactors, he tried to convince them to stay away from our group. Like, imagine, I just let you use my chapel. I just gave you bread and wine to offer the holy sacrifice in the mass. I let you use our altar. And then you're going to go over to my benefactor's house and convince them to stay away from us. So I don't know if you had something real quick to say, Father Lafour, but there was another good question in the chat that I think pertains to what we wanted to address as well.
Right. I hate poaching, and we need to support, canon law says we have to support our pastors. Again, this bishop wants to poach, but he's got to have to provide priests from here going out, so I don't believe in poaching benefactors. I think that's pretty low. I think that's probably, I hate to say, the motivation. It seems to be the motivation of some of these clergy. And of course, it's a dog eat dog world whenever there's not a lot of bread to go around. And so as our lady, I don't know if it was La Salette or Fatima, but she said the charity of many would grow cold. Maybe it was good success. Maybe Our Lady of the Purification of this big event or whatever. Sorry, I had the proper term for it. But, the charity of many has grown cold. And all the more reason we need the Eucharist, because that's the sacrament of charity. That's and our Revelation, Apocalypse chapter 2, verse 7, it talks about the church in Ephesus losing charity. And the way it's restored is to receive the Eucharist, the fruit of the tree of life. And if we're not receiving the sacraments regularly, it's hard to remain charitable, which is the fruit of a lot of sedevacantist or traditional laity that don't go to mass regularly. It's hard for them to stay charitable. It can happen, but it requires a very strong prayer life.
Okay, so another problem of the laity I see, says Derek's 3581, is simply treating trad priests as sacrament dispensers. We absolutely need a parish structure to help actually foster a trad parish community. Now, I thought about this, and the reason why I thought it pertained to one of the things that we had planned to discuss tonight was this whole idea of lay grifters. And I think we spoke about it a little bit before, touched on it a little bit before at the beginning of the show, but it goes back to this. I don't know if you've had a lot of these new people, Father Lafour, coming into your parish, but we also have new people coming to Our Lady of Good Hope, and a lot of them already know the names of the main mainstream, so to speak, mainstream trad podcasters. And so when they're coming in and checking out traditional parishes, they're doing so through the filter of what lay people who haven't gone through seminary, have real no formation in traditional Catholicism. They're looking at our parish through this lens, through these lenses. And I've actually specifically have said names to parishioners of people not to listen to, precisely because they distort reality. They distort reality. And of course, they'll get one of the things that the mainstream the trad Inc., so to speak, does is right now they're building a false hope over Pope Leo XIV, a false hope that somehow he's going to come in and save the day. Somehow he's going to come in and save the day. But even like Cardinal Radcliffe says, basically, he has a Bergoglian agenda, but he's going to do so with a different tactic, a different strategy, so that it's more palatable, so that Bergoglianism is more palatable to those who resisted it since 2013. So it's the same agenda, same strategy. They want to get rid of the traditional Latin Mass. They don't want to give people an ordinariate. We had another comment earlier. Any thoughts on the idea of a TLM ordinariate? Yes, very strong thoughts. It's a bad idea. It's not going to happen because they want it to end. They don't want it to coexist. They want to get rid of it. They want it to die. As Professor Massimo Fagioli said, you can have the 16th century Mass, just not the 16th century faith. And so this is why we're oftentimes trad priests are treated as sacramental Pesismenser, because they can have their online communities, their podcasts to get the faith. So you don't need to get the faith from the priest anymore. You don't need to get the faith from the priest anymore. You have podcasts. You have Dr. So-and-so, or you have a certain app that's developing with all the traditional teachings that you need because it's guaranteed to be traditional. Things like that.
You know, I love this topic because who are the real gatekeepers to the salvation of your soul? Are you putting your salvation in our Lord or in a lay person who's not ordained to teach, govern, and sanctify? The clergy, we're ordained to teach, to govern, and to sanctify. And part of that, it'd be nice if every clergy was on the public sphere and public dialogue and discourse that is social media now. But the thing is, we have 4 hours a day minimum between our breviaries, the Mass, praying our rosaries. If we get even a holy hour in there between, that'd be wonderful too. But handling actually parish life, which another aspect of this, there's a lot of priests that are traditional who just go from place to place, live in an airplane, and they're not grounded in a certain location. And well, I'm glad that they're able to do that. I've never flown an airplane more in my life than whenever I became a traditional priest. But that being said, being underneath a bishop, if you're going to travel and do that, is important, to not just be one that goes from place to place without a bishop. And to actually have integrity and say, okay, well, if I actually believe this, but I have donations coming from the synodal church, and I want to be seen as both synodal and traditional, I kind of have a problem with that, because I mean, not just me, but I know many other priests have had to give up everything. And our Lord even said, if you love mother, brother, father, sister, or spouse, or lands more than me, you can't be my disciple. And eventually you have to trust that God's providence is going to take over. Yeah, I know at my parish, I'm not a sacramental dispenser, and I appreciate the bishop, that's the retired bishop that's over there. He said it very clear, give Father LaFord chance to have a prayer life, and, don't talk to him all the time, but you can, if you want, if he's allowing and he has time for it, he can do extra stuff. And of course I do have time for extra things, but I'm not going to forsake my prayer life for it. And I'm going to also offer Mass. So I'm going to stay focused on one thing at a time. And that's how I have time for everything.
I would say to Father Martin's point about the rise of the lay, in the 90s is when I went to seminary, and Catholic Answers was ascendant and provided excellent material to do various kinds of apologetics and outreach to Protestants to try to bring them into the Catholic faith. But it's very key, if you're any kind of Catholic lay authority, that you disclose which bishop you're under the authority of. So that at bare minimum. And I find that most of these Catholic lay commentators do not disclose clearly which bishop they're under. So they're their own authority. And, it's every once in a while, people will dispute, say my authority or whatever on Twitter. And it's like, here's the thing. we have a Catholic ecclesiology, and a Catholic ecclesiology means lay people submit to their ordinary. And some of these Catholic commentators, they want it both ways. They want to say they're with the local synodal diocese in good standing, but then they speak against them online. Well, who's the source of the teaching? And on Twitter, when they give me flack, I just point out, if you think you have the authority to determine my legitimacy as a layperson, when in fact, Father Martin and I, our mentor, worked in the Vatican for the CDF on subjects like this, like determining the validity and illicitity of various groups. And, he said that most priests and bishops do not have the competence and information necessary to sort it out. And yet we've got these, lay people who watch a couple, videos, and they think that they're qualified to assess this stuff. They're not under any account, even from a synodal church bishop. They're just their own authority. And they manifest before God and man. They show that they don't believe in the three offices of the priesthood, because if they did, even if they disagreed with us, they would come with a certain respect for the office, even if they don't like any of the three of us. So when they don't, or they think that they have the authority to determine issues of validity and licitity, well, that's really a dangerous spot to put your soul in unnecessarily. And I would just say to Catholic, I'm not talking about people that are news aggregators. We've got a couple Catholics who comment on Catholic news, but if you're giving theological opinions and direction to people, then if you go beyond just presenting the news and maybe, giving your little opinion on it, you've got to disclose what bishop you're under. And you've got to take the responsibility of what that means. Because if you're under a synodal bishop and you're speaking contrary to their faith, you don't get to pick and choose from your authority. You're either under authority or you aren't. So it's kind of a weird situation. I don't know if you two have anything to say on that matter, but
I know Father Martin has an excellent point to make about obedience versus compliance on this topic. So I will defer to the expert philosopher here.
Well, Father LaFour is kind of pre-releasing an article I have coming out on our Substack, restlessheartmedia.substack.com. The link is in the description below. I try to put out content every single day, except maybe Saturday and Sunday. But even then, I try to shoot for Saturday as well. But on our Substack, we have every Monday we have my Sunday sermon. On Tuesday, we have something from the Augustinian charism that I've written. Regarding the Augustinian charism, and then different articles of different ideas coming out later through the week. But I have one coming out on Friday comparing obedience and compliance. And I draw from St. Thomas Aquinas and also St. Augustine to kind of emphasize the difference. To sum it up, and it's a great article, so you should read it. Great article. I put a lot of work into it. But ultimately, what came to mind first was St. Augustine's theology, or really ecclesiology, which he used in forming his his religious charism, his monasticism, which was community life, communion, union. And so St. Augustine says that the very principle of unity, is God. And so you can imagine the triangle where you have so many people pursuing the highest good, the summum bonum, which is God himself. And the closer they get to God, they find that they're in a community because there's several people, obviously, in search for the same one thing. So that's where community, that's where unity is found, isn't found in God alone. That's why his mantra, his motto for his charism is one mind and one heart in God. One mind and one heart in God. This is what it means to be in communion, to be of one mind and one heart in God.
It doesn't
now, obedience versus compliance.
It doesn't sound like a lot of these lay commentators who are gatekeeping are one mind and one heart with the synodal church that they blast every day.
Oh, exactly. So in obedience versus compliance, now obviously both of them are following orders. There's some sort of superior, there's some sort of order given, this is a sort of subject, then goes and does whatever they were told. But compliance can be done out of fear of retribution, fear of punishment. It's merely an external act. There's nothing interior that unites the interior, the heart, to the same object that the superior wants accomplished. They're just doing, okay, if I don't do this, then I'll get in trouble. It's, in one sense, when we all pay taxes, we're all in compliance. None of us really love our government so much that, oh yes, here, government, have my money. If you want more, take more. You know, we're all compliant with the taxes that we have to pay. But obedience, when we're obedient to God, it's because we know He loves us and we want to love Him in return. This is why we follow the commandments, not because of mere compliance, because, oh, I just don't want to go to hell. This is just mere attrition. It's imperfect. But what we truly want to do is love God and unite our will to His. That's what it truly means to be submissive under the same mission, is to unite our hearts and our wills to God. So this is what obedience means. And so when we're being obedient to a religious superior or to the Roman pontiff, we have to actually want what they're ordering us to do. We actually have to want what they are ordering us to do. So if we are ordered, for instance, to no longer have the Latin Mass at our parish, to be obedient is not just to accept it and move on to try to find another traditional Latin Mass. It's to actually want what we've been ordered to do. So if your bishop orders your Latin Mass closed, obedience says go to the Novus Ordo, because your bishop, who is standing in the place, is a high priest in the diocese, is to go to the Novus Ordo. But obviously you can't, because the principle of unity is God Himself. And when the superiors are no longer leading you through their authority to the summum bonum, to the highest good, then St. Thomas Aquinas says, our consciences are no longer bound. Our consciences are no longer bound, because we're supposed to be pursuing the highest good, God Himself. But those that are above us, our superiors, are ordering us to do something different. They have a different objective, a different end. And so this is why it's important to understand what the principle of unity is, which is the highest good, and then also to know the difference between compliance, which is merely external, and obedience. And when we're asked to be obedient, we actually have to want something bad for us. If you're in the diocese of Charlotte or Detroit or Knoxville, you have to want something bad for you, and you can't. You're no longer bound. Your conscience is no longer bound.
Right.
So thanks for ruining my article coming up.
No, it's great. I think it'll get a lot of good advertisement. My internet cut out as soon as you started your thesis, and so I missed all that. So I have to read it myself.
There you go.
Yeah, but it seems like
any thoughts?
yeah.
No, go ahead.
I would just say it seems that compliance, based on the very minimal that I did here at the beginning and the end, plus also at breakfast this morning, was that people are complying but not being obedient. They're giving lip service to Rome. That's no longer Rome. By the way, that term Rome, this is important. And Father Dave Nix brought this point up that before Vatican I, Rome was known as the Vatican. Like if you said Rome has spoken, it's referring to the Pope. It's referring to the church herself. But nowadays people say the Vatican. Why is that important? Because Cardinal Manning said in 1963 that Rome would lose the faith, and Our Lady of La Salette prophesied that Rome would lose the faith. And then Our Lady of Good Success mentioned the warning of Rome would lose the faith. And people in modern day traditional world want to say, oh no, Rome just means the city, but not the Holy See. But that's not how the term was used before Vatican I. Rome was referring to everything that is the church, including the See of Peter. So nowadays we call it the Vatican has spoken, because the papal throne has been shrunk from the city of Rome to just Vatican Hill after Vatican I, which wasn't able to finish after 10 months of convening because the Freemasons had taken over Rome and they forced the Pope to be a prisoner of the Vatican. So that's when that distinction was being made. So I just want to mention that point too. So people want to say, oh, you're disobedient to the Vatican. Well, I'm just living my conscience, but it's about integrity. Rome is no longer Rome. The gates of hell will not prevail. It means that Rome cannot be a mouth of a heretic. And we're hearing a different faith than the faith of our forefathers. And
Absolutely.
so it's like, okay, well, am I going to belong to the faith of all time and all places and believe in the same way? Or am I going to believe in a faith that's not the same in all times and all places and not believed in the same way? once you put it in that simple perspective, it becomes very easy. But unfortunately, that requires you to read. It requires you to be humble and say, okay, I don't know everything, and I have to relearn history. So Bishop Miko went, and his internet's attacking him.
It's a good thing I'm at least staying alive because I'm the host of the show, so I don't know what would happen if I left. That would be bad. Let's see. I just stumbled upon this. I'll find your individual platforms and follow. Thank you, Praytivation1. Follow LaFour. You don't have your underneath your name. You don't have advertised your YouTube channel. What is your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is Breaking Trad Sermons, and if I can edit that, I will. Let's see. Edit avatar. No. Edit name and headline. Okay. Yeah. So you could find me on Breaking Trad Sermons. My
Is that it?
let's see, my YouTube channel, I got the name inspiration because of when I was in exile from the Novus Ordo and I discovered tradition. And the more I learned about tradition, I was watching Breaking Bad. And I watched the whole series of Breaking Bad, and I had the time for it. So I really enjoyed the story arc. But the main thesis, the main plot is Walter White had every opportunity to break for good, but he always broke for bad. He always made the bad decision. And so when I was exposed to the truth of tradition, the red pill of tradition, so to speak, I broke for tradition and I left the Novus Ordo. So you either go back to the Novus Ordo or you break for tradition. So I'm breaking trad. And so I have sermons up there since 2021. And I didn't post very regularly until I learned that I had an app on my phone that was able to put everything on that virtually seconds after finishing my sermons, finishing Mass. But you can find the breadth of all my sermons in 5 years' time on Telegram. And so I have Breaking Trad sermons on Telegram as well. That's a whole nother rabbit hole if you want to go down that one, because you'll discover my journey of intellectual formation and conversion along those lines. So that's kind of a bit about my sermon channel.
Let's see.
Yeah, sorry I dropped out there, guys. I missed your little part there. In my process of computer repair, if I don't move the mouse, which is why the graphics card, when it goes idle, it shuts everything down. I have no idea. Well, I do have an idea how to fix it, but I'm going to just have to reinstall drivers and stuff. But anyway, my apologies. If I fall out again, that's what happened.
Did you have anything to say, Your Excellency, regarding obedience and compliance? That's when you
yeah. So I mean, just the thing is, that was actually, I was formed as a Novus Ordo seminarian in a fairly conservative seminary, and I prefer, it's not a secret, but I prefer to not promote the name because I don't want to accidentally splatter some good people there, and I want to be able to speak freely about what went on. And most of it was good. It was a good experience, but I remember going to my old archbishop. He was like a second dad to me. And I was just about ready for the whole ordination, the temporary diaconate. And I said to him, I can't go forward. This was 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now. And he says, well, why not? And he said, is it a girl? And I said, no, that's not my, that wasn't the challenge. I said, for me, it's obedience. And I'll never forget, he was bald, but if he had hair, it would have went up and back. You know how some people are surprised because his whole forehead moved. And he said, obedience? What do you think I'd ever ask you to do? And I said, your grace, I said, I'd follow you to the gates of hell and back. It's not obedience to you that I have an issue. It's your successors. And I said, with my mouth, I said, I'm going to last 2 weeks. I'm going to get suspended and fired. And he stopped and he thought, and he said, you're right. And it was like, you got to remember, I was in the seminary in John Paul II era with Veritatis Splendor, and it was making the liberal moralists' heads explode and stuff like that. And there was, the celebrants were given for the TLM, and things looked like they were on the mend. And so, but there was this crop. I mean, you could see what would happen. And sure enough, the diocese I was in, all the conservative priests disappeared. And they would just refer to their address as the chancery website. And it's like, what happened. I mean, of course, people are going to think, oh, they did something wrong. No, they were told, you come into the room, and instead of meeting the bishop, you're given the NDA. You sign the NDA, and they'll pay you a small stipend until you're dead. One of my friends is a FedEx delivery guy. He's an ordained Roman Catholic priest, Novus Ordo. He's a FedEx delivery driver as his living now. And he signed the deal. I won't talk about what happened. And of course, what do people think? They think they did something wrong. Typically, a sin against chastity. But no, a lot of the times is they were teaching too conservatively, not even traditional, conservative. And you rub the wrong diocese the wrong way or the wrong people, and you get some very powerful people. And these same powerful people, by the way, support globalists and leftist governments. They support all this very things that are contra fide. And how can you serve under that? You can't. So I long story, and it's not for today to tell, but I ended up back in God's service, and out of obedience, basically a series of events told me very clearly that I had to give my worldly comfort, my worldly life aside, and return to my original path. And so I did. But yeah, I couldn't. Obedience is a thing. Like, it always seemed to strike me funny. There's a traditional group who remain nameless, who begged, almost like groveled, to a local diocesan bishop for his official portrait so they could put it in their chapels. And it's like, this is a man they have no respect for, who they speak ill of when he's not around, but their public presentation for politics, and everybody knows it is. I mean, that bishop's not stupid. He knows they don't like him. And yet they go through this simulation, you see. And for me, sunlight is the best disinfectant. We're not going to fix the problems in the church and the world by worrying about whether this happens to scandalize some crazy feminist, and we're going to get her upset. She's going to paint her hair blue and make seal noises at us. It doesn't matter. We have to serve our Lord and King. We have to serve the truth. And if we're going to fix this circus, it means addressing with this stuff clearly as men resolve disputes, not as the effeminate resolve disputes. We have to change that model strongly.
I think if you're a laity and want to have a podcast about the Catholic faith, you must go through a classical education criteria. Many are not educated and are harmful to the faithful. How about this? How about we just stop giving lay Catholic podcasters money, because they're obviously just doing it as a hobby. They don't need the money. They got real jobs, right? And then we stop giving them likes and subscribes. Because here's the thing. If you're a lay podcaster without a real job, then you're trying to milk the faithful of something you have no right to milk the faithful of, using the Catholic religion, the Catholic faith, for monetary financial profit. You have no right to that. So get a real job and do that as a mere hobby, or don't do it at all.
It's called the seminary, and it's called getting ordained. So if you have an opinion, if God has put it on your heart to preach to the nations, you're in luck, because our Lord 2,000 years ago established the holy priesthood to teach, govern, and sanctify the faithful. And so it does exist, and it's good to not undercut the clergy who have already given up their lives and prayed probably 3 hours more prayer a day than you, and have read the lives of the saints and touch God with our hands and give absolution. And when called upon to bless people's homes and sometimes even do exorcisms, which do happen, have some respect and deference to the clergy in our public discourse. And you'll notice on my Twitter accounts, I never attack clergy. I don't do it. I have too much respect, even for bad clergy. They need prayers. And I know I stood in groups of many priests, dozens of priests at a time, and I've said I will always need my brother priest. I will always need a priest to give me absolution or give me last rites. A heart surgeon doesn't do heart surgery on himself. He needs another heart surgeon to do that for him. And so we do need our brother priests, and we need to support them. and be very grateful for those that the unsung heroes of the traditional Catholic movement, and have not just all the miles they've traveled, but all the confessions they've heard, and all the masses they've said, the hours they've prayed on their knees and rosary beads, and they've passed their hands through. And we have to be other Christ. So if you do feel compelled, which is kind of ironic, the one that gatekeeps, one of the laity that gatekeeps the most is actually a validly ordained priest, because he has the Dutch touch from the old Roman Catholics. And so he's actually more valid than the traditional clergy that he actually goes to for mass. But, that's a whole nother topic for another day. Shots fired. But it's a matter of integrity. I just say it's a matter of integrity. And so if I after studying the Church Council of Trent, and that's another question I have to ask. Why was I never, in 9 years of seminary formation, ever taught the canons of the Council of Trent?
Right.
Why was I not taught Quo Primum of Pius V? Why was I not taught De Defectibus of Pope St. Pius V? Why was I not taught Pope Boniface VIII's Unum Sanctum? Why was I not taught all the papal encyclicals before 1958, except for Rerum Novarum? Okay, it seems like only Rerum Novarum and whatever things pertaining to sacred scripture before Vatican II we ever read, but we didn't read anything that Pope Gregory XVI wrote. Why is that? Why did, or my favorite pope in the 1800s was Pope Pius VII, or Pope Pius VIII. And the reason why, and it's Pope Pius VIII, you know why? Because he was only Pope for 10 months and he wrote one papal bull, and it's like 10 paragraphs long. And he's just echoing what Popes Pius VI, VII had said before him. And so it's a great summary of the problems of the church and warning us of what we're experiencing today. And it's a quick read because it's only summarizing what has always been taught. Why was that never taught to me in seminary? That's what I have to ask. This is part of our faith. This is what we believe as Catholics. This is part of the ordinary and universal magisterium. So if the faith before Vatican II and the faith after Vatican II are irreconcilable, is it the same faith? It's a very simple, cut and dry answer. And we can't be gatekeeping laity from receiving the sacraments from traditional clergy who have Catholic faith, who have Catholic sacraments, and want to get souls to heaven. It's the primary rule of the church. And so I beg to stop saying that different traditional clergy are Protestant, or saying that we're schismatic, or saying that whatever label that can defame and hurt the care of souls. I travel to out of state. I travel over 2,000 miles twice a year to go to a state with mountains to take care of a traditional Catholic family. And some of that family doesn't come to me for sacraments because a certain other traditional group says you can't go to his Sunday mass because he preaches. You can only go to daily mass, and only if he doesn't preach. But I'm only there twice a year, so I preach every mass I go. So I offer there. Mm-hmm. And yet some of them will come to me for confession, but not for mass. And they'll get more counsel, more good, strong Catholic moral theology out of that confession. God bless you, St. Anthony Padua Radtrag. God bless you, man. Great work. You're doing great work out there. But they'll get more out of that confession and that sacrament of reconciliation than they will the other 6 months they're listening to this other traditional group that's telling them, don't come to my mass and receive the Eucharist from me. And it's like, what? I'll end with this. When I was newly ordained in tradition, the first Sunday that I offered mass, when I elevated the host, and you could take it or leave it, but this was my experience. I heard the voice of our Lord speak to me from the host. And you know what he said? He said, I am not divided within myself. Christ said, I am not divided within myself. God is one. There is one church, there's one faith, there's one Lord, one baptism. And I believe that. And, dare I believe divine revelation. And it has to be the same faith at all times, all places, and believed in the same way. And to hear it preached a different way causes division. So the traditional Catholics are really not the ones causing division. I think that's the biggest takeaway. The traditional clergy are not trying to cause division. We're the ones actually fighting for unity. And the sooner that we come to the middle, as Father Martin mentioned, about finding where God is, there's the uniting of community. All the different souls going together and united under one roof under God. That's true obedience. And to continue to undercut traditional clergy that have goodwill, have took time to read the documents, to see that, actually there is a very big distinction between before and after Vatican II, and the amount of personnel change. It was a perfect storm, and there's a lot to it. So on my sermon channel, there is there's a lot of information there on my sermon channel. The Case for Tradition by Father, what's his name? Don Prosper Garanjay in the liturgical year. When I found that he actually, using the liturgy, was able to show us, but the church using her liturgy and the reading of the divine office, how church history is supposed to be understood by the Old Testament, it really exploded my comprehension of how to understand sacred scripture, how to understand sacred tradition, how to understand church history, all through the liturgy. And the liturgy has to be perfect, because the liturgy is heaven on earth, and heaven is perfect. And there's nothing impure in heaven. So our liturgy has to be pure. And this is why the Council of Trent said in session 22 that if you say that the bells and the smells, so to speak, and the ritual and the vestments are causes for impiety versus piety, let them be anathema. Catholic Church can't give us impure worship that leads us to impiety, that leads us to a loss of faith. And so when people use the word schismatic or Protestant, it's schismatic from what? That's what people have to ask. What are you schismatic actually from? And it's impossible for a Catholic to be schismatic from the Catholic faith if they have the Catholic faith with Catholic sacraments and underneath legitimate Catholic authority that possesses that same Catholic faith. So that's
Is it better to become Orthodox? Is it better to become Orthodox and schismatic if we don't have access to TLAM instead of the Synodal Church that is basically another form of Protestantism Reformation? Well, I think I've addressed this in different ways throughout this episode. Is that essentially we have to fight for the West, we have to fight for the truth, we have to fight for tradition. We can't. First of all, Orthodoxy is a completely different religion. You have to probably, even if you join Orthodoxy, get rebaptized, all this kind of stuff, and then Orthodoxy is more divided within itself. There's some that accept divorce and remarriage, others don't. Some accept priestly orders, others don't from Catholics. So many different things. Orthodoxy is a massive, 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 massive mess. And you could even find videos online. I forgot his name, I forget his name. He's an Antiochian Orthodox priest, but he has this really nice video on jurisdictionalism in the United States and how all these jurisdictions have basically different practices that have different faiths, and they need to somehow reconcile this. Well, that's Orthodoxy. They're literally, each one is its own religion. So I would say absolutely not. It's dumb.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get. It's the real box of chocolates. I mean, you're really not going to know what you're going to get when it comes to the Orthodox. There's some good Orthodox clergy out there. I ran into an Orthodox deacon when I was in that state with mountains, when I was at out and about, and he actually was in lay clothes and I was in my cassock, and so he actually came up to me and said, "Hey, are you a Catholic? Are you a priest?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And within a few minutes, he was able to dial me down that I was a super trad, and so he then confessed that he was a deacon in the Orthodox Church. And I do appreciate their love for the saints, their love for the Blessed Mother, the Theotokos, and they have a liturgy based on the apostolic ritual. So it's really lovely in that respect. But again, there's some really strange ideas you will find in the Orthodox world that are not in compliance with the faith of all time. So as much as they claim to be part of the faith of all time and unchanging, that's actually not necessarily true in every case.
So Derek says, Your Excellency, all these trad podcasters accept Vatican II in their actions. They all despise priests and think what you're saying, Father, is too clerical. What do you think about that, Your Excellency?
Yeah, I would say, sorry, I'm again, if I look a little distracted, I'm just handling my technical issues. As you see, the computer keeps wanting to shut me out. So the thing is, folks, is that I just want to speak to what Father Ford was saying. You know, Father Martin and I, one of our favorite restaurants, we go to this little Greek village essentially, and we enjoy Greek food, and the people are so welcoming to us, and they're we appreciate that, and beautiful people of faith and culture and the like. And if you're born Orthodox or born in the East, that's a very different situation than if you are baptized West and you've abandoned the fight for the West, right? So I just again, I don't want to be harsh on anybody, but if you are, don't use a good to trick yourself into a mixed religion again, where you're just picking what you feel comfortable with rather than discerning what God wants of you. And very often what God wants of us is the uncomfortable. I think I can speak for all three clergy here that we've lost friends and certain familiar relationships over our decision to go a path where a lot of people wouldn't agree with us. And, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. I don't regret a single decision with regard to trying to preserve the old faith, the faith of our ancestors, the faith of the saints. Those of you who follow me on Twitter or Substack know I often say the same thing. You can have the God of Athanasius or the God of Teilhard de Chardin, but you can't have both. So choose boldly and go with it, right? You want the God of Teilhard, great, but that's not, when people call us schismatic, you know what? It's actually deeper than that. Because if you're a follower of the God of Teilhard, we don't even share the same religion, right? You share the trappings of a religion you don't believe in. It's like the State Church of China. I once said to someone, they were going on about regularity, and I said, well, unlike you, I'm not in communion with the State Church of China. And then they stop and look at me, and I just say, listen, here's the thing. They replaced the crucifix with the portrait of dear leader. They replaced the Stations of the Cross with pictures of their communist revolution. And you're telling me that I'm a schismatic or I'm bad because I'm not in communion with the State Church of China? Get your head out of whatever orifice is convenient here, because this is wrong. Like, you can agree or disagree with the clergy here on broadcast. There's legitimate reasons to say, fathers, I appreciate, you're trying to serve our Lord Jesus. I don't agree with you. That's fine. That's what we call respectful disagreement. We're going to make our case, and we will win or lose with presenting our views to you on the basis of honest gentlemen presenting our best case. Okay. But when you just throw back that you're telling us to follow Radcliffe, to follow the State Church of China, to follow a world of hammer and sickle crucifixes and Pachamamas, not going to happen. Not going to happen. That's not our God. Our God is the same God as St. Athanasius and Bellarmine, Leo XIII, and whatever this Abrahamic family house is. Go ahead, Google it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go right now to your Google and type Abrahamic family house, and you tell me that's of God.
So yes, trad podcasters, do accept Vatican II in their actions, precisely because obviously in America we have a Protestant culture where you're supposed to make money, have a upper middle class lifestyle, have all these activities, look like the typical suburban family, all these sorts of things, and adoration doesn't fit into any of that. Daily mass doesn't fit into any of that. Dressing modestly doesn't fit into any of that. So one of the reasons why they do accept Vatican II in their actions is because Vatican II is conformity with the world. And a lot of trad podcasters want to conform with the world. They let their wives wear sleeveless dresses to baptisms while they're wearing a veil. Sleeveless dress with a veil. Okay.
That's another aspect. Thank you, Father, for bringing that up about lay people really needing to live the Catholic faith. We can't be, this is from one of my parishioners, by the way. He went to Catholic universities. He was homeschooled. There was nobody raised more Catholic than this guy. But he will never marry a woman who's raised in the Catholic milieu because they wear their veils on Sunday and then they wear bikinis on Saturday. You know, so there's all this immodesty with all these women that actually don't know how to be wives. I'm not saying every woman out there is doing that in the trad world. There are very good traditional women out there. But by and large, especially with the indult situation, and people from the Novus Ordo, they want their traditional mass and their modernism too. And so they, the Lavender Mafia and also priests not willing to preach hard sermons. There are some priests willing to preach hard sermons out there, but I mean, we challenge men all the time to live a virtuous life. But because of that, we actually have a lot of young men in their teens and 20s and 30s I don't know about 30s, maybe some of the younger 30s, want to live a virtuous life, a saintly life. And unfortunately, all the women are very concerned about still looking good, and they want to be the superhero in their own life story instead of the princess that's saved. So we have a lot of women who are trying to live the hero arc that they're not supposed to be living, and they're not letting men do the job of actually being the providers and the breadwinners. And St. Paul said it best this way, that we should work. We should work. We should stop trying to compete with one another and be prideful one above the other, and do your job. In the words of the great coach Sean Payton of the New Orleans Saints, do your job. You know, so that's another thing about the podcasters. If again, and you said this too, Father Martin, already, it's worth repeating though, lay people need to be working, and priests need to be praying and offering the sacraments, and studying the faith and passing it on and teaching the faith. And that's our jobs. That's our roles. I'm a very good baker. I'm a very good skilled baker, but I don't make a living baking bread. If I bake bread, or if I bake whole grain cookies that I milled that morning from fresh grain, which I do because there's a lot of benefits to it, that's out of my free time and out of charity, but that's extra. That's not my job. So my faithful know that if I give them cookies, chocolate chip cookies with all these great ingredients, that is very nutritious, and they know that, wow, okay, Father really loves us. And every now and then, this is why you show up to my church, because every now and then you get chocolate chip cookies homemade from my kitchen, and fresh milled grain. And so you get all the nutrition you could ever ask for, but it's not every Sunday. And so it's time in the spiritual life. It's time dedicated and exposure to the holy things of God, that God gives you gifts. He gives you treasures over time. He doesn't do it by timing it just right and say, hey, I picked the right Sunday. Of course, my internet went out.
No, it's still on. Are you guys there? I see you guys moving.
Okay, good. Well, I'm not moving, but that's all good if you hear me anyway.
Yeah. Let's see if His Excellency, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. The StreamYard program. The reason why I drop off, it's not StreamYard's fault, but it is kind of funny. It's a quirky platform. Sometimes it does freeze, or there's a little bit of a lag. But yeah. So hopefully I don't. If I fall off again, I'll just say goodnight. But I'm going to do my very best. I'm just going to move my hand over here and keep the mouse moving. I should have this problem sorted out by tomorrow. But
So one of the things that was funny a couple of weeks ago, maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago. It was on a Sunday, and I saw someone retweet. It was some influencer from Spain tweet like a video of a ballet, and of course in ballet, what do you have is a woman in a mini skirt lifting her leg up and showing it the whole world.
All right,
performance.
The famous viral tweet, Father. You got how many? There was a lot of people that got traction.
And I said ballet is gravely immoral.
Yeah.
And then of course later on I read an article about it, and still people just don't understand the fact that no woman would lift up their skirt or lift up her leg in such a way, out on the street or with family, whatever else. But
right.
we create certain cultural contexts in which we all kind of want to say, hey, let's agree to let immorality pass in this context.
And the outrage in some cases that your tweet was, but that's my granddaughter you're talking about, essentially, right?
Oh, so
I've got a story about that if you think the audience will be interested. And it was my last fourth degree Knights of Columbus meeting once upon a time. And what happened was I was working in a secular profession, and I got a call because, of course, I just recently left the seminary just before the temporary diaconate. And so I was very close with the Archbishop. So I kept that friendship, even though I was no longer in formation. And so I had a priest call me in tears, like really upset. And he was actually an ex-military guy. He's not the kind of guy that just cries. And he's crying and he says, "You got to talk to the Archbishop. It was horrible. It was horrible." I said, "What's horrible?" The patronal feast for that diocese, all the priests were there. It was sort of like the Chrism Mass. All the priests were there, and they made a big deal out of it. And Knights Columbus were there with honor guard and the whole 9 yards. And around the altar were high school children, 15, 16, 17, in see-through costumes, holding bowls of incense around the holy altar. And the priest was beside himself. He looks up and he sees basically a naked woman in front of him, and a naked young woman. And so he was scandalized and upset. And he says, you have to talk to the bishop. You have to do something. And he said half the Knights of Columbus got up and walked out. They were scandalized. And I said, well, why don't you just call him? I mean, why are you asking me? I'm a layman at that point, right? And he says, yeah, but the bishop listens to you. He says, if I call the bishop, I'm going to get, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to get somewhere. He says, but he'll listen to you. So I thought, okay, well, maybe, whatever. So I do my homework. And this was back in the time of John Paul II. So I do my homework. I find there's some letters in Rome forbidding liturgical dance. It was a directive. And I printed it out, and I went to my brother Knights, and I went to the meeting. And I noticed that the Knights, there was a group of Knights sort of on the corner looking kind of sheepish, but I didn't pay any attention to it. See, I didn't know who walked out. I wasn't at that mass. I was on a business meeting out of town. And so I got up when it was my turn to speak. I got up and I said, thank you to all those brave Knights who walked out at this display, because it was in support of what the church teaches. I have this directive, which I'm going to read, and in support of our Archbishop. And I have a meeting with him tomorrow. And I'm going to basically tell him I thanked you, and we'll carry on. And I thought I would get a lot of support from my brother Knights because they walked out, right? Oh, no. I got a guy after guy after guy get up and with a loud voice holler at me, how dare I? It's their granddaughter up there, and blah, blah, blah. And if the bishop listens to you, I'm going to go back and become Methodist. Well, jeepers, this is what I'm dealing with, right? So I see the Archbishop, and he had this towel. He was like, people have poker towels. Well, his says whenever he was nervous, he'd rub the back of his head like this. It was kind of funny. So he started, as soon as I got on the subject, the hand went behind the head and the way he was going. And I just said, Your Grace, this is what Rome has said. This is what I told the Knights. This is the response I got. I said, I've got some of your priests who remain nameless. They're upset at what happened. And you know what he said to me? He says, well, it was Sister Emily, and she's in charge of the liturgy here. And I said, you know what? It's kind of my mic drop moment with the Archbishop. I said, you are a successor of the apostles. I don't want to hear about, I didn't say this part, but I didn't want to hear about Sister Emily. I don't care. So, but this is the thing. And that's why it was pretty clear I did not fit in the Novus Ordo regime. And, God's hand was in all that. But this is what we're dealing with. And so what Father Martin's saying is the reaction wasn't, in part, Father Martin and I share an attribute, Father Lefort too. We like to stir the pot a bit, right? So some of that just to get you guys discussing. And again, we take respectful disagreement. And if you can demonstrate to us using reason that we're wrong, guess what? We admit it. We agree with you. We are convincible on a lot of things. But basically what Father Martin would say, fine, defend it. But you know what they do? This is how you win all these Catholic Twitter arguments. They attack the person instead of the idea. They have nothing. They have nothing but hurling insults. And so the same thing with that Knights of Columbus meeting all those years ago. They didn't tell that not one person considered what God might want. Not one person considered what the church, what's good for the church, good for the zeal of souls. They were concerned instead that someone might insult their granddaughter because she worked so hard on the dance. Well, I'm sorry. It was inappropriate, right? You know, and to put your I guess your granddaughter's reputation over the rights of God, over what the Archbishop would, how he wants to lead, and then unfortunately, apparently how he wants to lead is through a sister in a pantsuit. So, all right, before God, you made your decisions, right? So I don't know, Father, if I know I've told you that story before, but I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's so weird. It's so crazy. And that was the last Fourth Degree Knights Columbus I ever went to.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Restless Heart Media. We had about 134 people watching across platforms. We enjoyed so much being able to engage with you in the live chat, answering your questions, and also talking about these unspoken issues in the traditional Latin Mass movement, where, of course, we all want to actually live the faith, not just go to a pretty Mass on Sunday and then go about living whatever worldly lives Monday through Saturday, but actually truly becoming saints. That's what we're about here at Restless Heart Media, the interior life, the spiritual life. Thank you all. The closing video here, the outro, I just made an intro for our usual Friday night live stream, Friday Night Leisures with me and my friend Alberto. This week we're not having, well, I don't know. I'll see if I can find somebody for our Friday Night Live. Alberto is busy. His sister's getting married, so that's on Friday, so he's not going to be available. So if I can find somebody, one of my friends to sub in for him, then we'll have it. But if not, then we'll just resume next week. Next week on Tuesday, we have our usual programming with the commentary on Story of a Soul by Saint Therese of Lisieux. Alberto and I are reading Story of a Soul, and we'll be giving commentary on the spiritual classic. And then next Friday, of course, we'll have our Friday Night Leisure. So thank you so much for joining us on Restless Heart Media. God bless.